In the beginning, American college football belonged to another world. It belonged to the brick courtyards of Harvard and Yale, to the stone chapels of Princeton, to the polished lawns of the Eastern elite. On crisp fall afternoons in the late 1800s, young men in leather helmets walked out from libraries and lecture halls that predated the United States itself. Gentlemen in topcoats and bowler hats watched from neat wooden stands. Sports writers in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia treated these games as an extension of their own society, refined, respectable, and properly Eastern. To most of the country, that was college football. If you were listening from a farm in Kansas, or a small town in Texas, or a mill village in Alabama, that world felt far away. Those schools were not built for you. Their football teams represented a class and a culture that did not include you. Their colors did not fly over your courthouse. Their songs were not sung in your churches, diners, or grain elevators. But at the same time, quietly, on muddy patches of ground, far from the Ivy League, another kind of college and another kind of football was being born. These new schools did not look like the old ones. No centuries-old endowments, no marble gates, no stained-glass memorial chapels, no alumni lists full of senators, judges, and railroad barons. They were made of red brick and plain boards. Classrooms with coal stoves, dormitories that looked like barracks, barns pressed up against campus boundaries. They sat on the edges of small towns, surrounded by cornfields, wheat fields, timber, or pasture land. Their students were the sons and daughters of farmers, shopkeepers, railroad men, coal miners, mechanics, and veterans. Many of them showed up with calloused hands, patched clothes, and no family tradition of higher education at all. They existed because of a simple, radical idea passed in the middle of the Civil War, that every state should have a public college for ordinary people, not for a social class, not for one city, for the state. The Moral Act of 1862 took federal land and handed it to the states, with a condition: use it to endow at least one college that would teach agriculture, engineering, and the mechanic arts alongside reading, writing, and the humanities. A college where a farm kid could learn scientific farming, where a blacksmith's daughter could become an engineer, where a soldier could study surveying or bridge building instead of going straight back to the fields. These places would come to be called land-grant colleges, then agricultural colleges, and then, in the mouths of their critics, something else: cow colleges. To many in the old guard, cow college was not a playful nickname. It was a verdict. These schools were useful, they said, good for churning out agronomists and farm agents, good for training mechanics, good for teaching boys to count bushels, not, quote, Virgil. But they were not real universities, not members of the club, not refined enough, not old enough, not important enough. When these colleges began to field football teams, when Kansas State Agricultural College lined up in threadbare uniforms, or Iowa Agricultural College scraped a rough field out of the mud, Eastern writers and alumni smirked. Play your little game, boys. Real football lives back here. No one in that circle believed that within a few generations, the roar, the money, and the meaning of college football would belong not to them, but to those same cow colleges and state schools. They did not believe it, because they did not understand the country they were living in. They did not see where America was heading. They did not see what happens when you give the children of farmers and factory workers their own institutions, their own colors, their own songs, and their own Saturday stage. They did not see the simple truth that, in a nation of 48, then 50 states, the schools that belong to the people will sooner or later own the people's game. This is the story of how the colleges they mocked became the colleges that rule college football Saturdays. This is the quiet revenge of the farm schools. To understand how unlikely this was, you have to start with what a cow college really was. After 1862, states across the country began claiming their land, selling parcels, and using the proceeds to build something new. In the Midwest and Great Plains, Kansas State Agricultural College, Iowa Agricultural College, Michigan Agricultural College, what would become the University of Nebraska's powerful public institutions in the South, Agricultural and Mechanical College of Texas, Auburn as the Alabama Polytechnic Institute, Louisiana State with its military and agricultural roots, Oklahoma A&M, later Oklahoma State. In the North and West, Washington State, Oregon State, Colorado A&M, and more. Their early course catalogs did not brag about finishing schools and Latin clubs. They promised animal husbandry, crop rotation, soil chemistry, railroad engineering, mechanical drawing, surveying, and practical teaching. The Ivy League read Greek and Latin classics. The cow colleges studied how to feed a continent, build bridges, and run machines. If you were an editor at an Eastern paper in 1890, it was easy to feel superior. You looked at muddy main streets and half-finished campuses and saw nothing threatening. If you were a farm kid in 1890, those new colleges were a miracle. For the first time, there was a school built with you in mind. You could ride a horse, a wagon, or a train a few hours from home and step onto a campus wearing your state's name. No one asked what your father did. No one assumed you were a guest. You belonged. It is no accident that those students took to football. Football in its early decades was not a polished spectacle. It was brutal. Scrums, broken noses, mud, and confusion. A contest of leverage, will, and pain tolerance. That made sense to boys who had hauled hay, swung hammers, or worked from pre-dawn to dusk. On rough Saturday afternoons, these new colleges began to play each other. Kansas versus Kansas State, Iowa versus Iowa State, A&M versus Texas, Auburn versus Georgia Tech, Oklahoma versus Oklahoma, A&M. A few dozen students, a scattering of professors, local townspeople circling the field. It did not look like much, but something important was happening. Every time a team in block letters agricultural state, A&M, took the field, those players were sending a message home. We belong here. Your sons belong here. Your daughters belong here. This is our school. Even if the rest of the country was not paying attention yet, those games meant something in those towns. They stitched a bond between campus and countryside. On paper, the balance of power stayed where it had always been. If you picked up a paper in 1900 or 1910 and asked who ruled college football, the answer lived out east: Yale and its great teams. Harvard, Princeton, Penn, Army and Navy, with their own prestige. They had the headlines, they had the trophies, they had decades of reputation. But underneath that, America was changing. Population moved west and south. Railroads linked small towns to big markets. Immigrants and migrants poured into factory cities and farm counties. Public high schools appeared with their own football fields. In places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Alabama, high school boys were learning the game in front of their own communities. Those boys were not catching trains to New Haven. They were looking at the big brick campus with State, or A&M, in its name, the one their neighbors talked about, the one their coach had gone to, the one their parents might actually afford. The land-grant and state schools had something the old elites did not: numbers. More students, more alumni, more communities invested in their success. When they added rows to their bleachers, people filled them. What was a casual club game at an Ivy campus became, in farm states, a weekly civic event, a reason to come into town, a reason to get cleaned up, a reason to be proud. And when radio arrived, voices crackling over long distances, those events grew larger than their fences. You could sit in a kitchen hundreds of miles away and listen to a team called State, or A&M, or U, of your state fighting for you. By the 1,920 seconds and 1,930 seconds, you can see the shift starting to take form. Big Midwestern publics like Michigan and Minnesota rise. Southern programs like Alabama and Tennessee become feared. Notre Dame Catholic, immigrant, uninvited by the old elite barnstorms, the country and proves you can be a national power without their blessing. This is not yet the final revolution, but it is the warning shot. The old aristocracy of the sport is being nudged aside by schools that draw their strength from farmers, factory workers, immigrants, mill hands, and shopkeepers. Then the Second World War ends and the change accelerates. The GI Bill pours an entire generation of veterans into American colleges. Where do they go? To the big state universities, to the land-grant colleges, to the places with room. They bring maturity. They bring discipline. They bring leadership. Many of them bring serious athletic ability. Suddenly, cow colleges have more students, older students, hungrier students. They grow again: more dorms, more classrooms, more labs, and yes, more seats in the stadium. At the same time, high school football is exploding. Texas Friday nights under the lights. Steel towns in Pennsylvania. Mill villages in the Carolinas. Small town Ohio. Florida speed. Gulf Coast toughness. Stadiums fill. Local papers cover every snap. Radio stations call the big rivalry games. Coaches turn out better players every year. When those players go looking for a college, the path of least resistance leads to their state school or regional powers. They want to play close to home. They want their parents to see them. They want to run through a tunnel wearing the colors they grew up watching. The talent pipeline, quietly, has been redrawn. It does not run through Harvard Yard anymore. It runs through Norman, Lincoln, Tuscaloosa, Austin, Columbus, Baton Rouge, Ann Arbor, Gainesville, College Station, dozens more. The ingredients are all there. More players, more fans, more seats, more radio audiences. Soon, more television. Whoever understands how to harness that will own the sport. Some schools read that future earlier and better than others. Nebraska is one of the clearest examples. This is a state many outsiders thought of as flat land and mile markers. But inside the borders, the University of Nebraska became something larger. Cornhuskers. It sounds like a joke to outsiders. It sounds like home if you grew up there. In the 1,960 seconds, 70 seconds, and 90 seconds, under Bob Devaney and Tom Osborne, Nebraska built a machine. National titles, innovative strength and conditioning, nutrition and weight rooms that looked like science fiction compared to what many coastal schools had, disciplined, punishing lines that reflected the work ethic of the people in the stands. Memorial Stadium in Lincoln became a ritual. On game day, it was the third largest city in the state. Farm work scheduled around kickoff, weddings and harvests planned with the schedule in mind. Opponents who once laughed at Cornhuskers found themselves walking into a wall of red and walking out with bruises. When television cameras zoomed out over that sea of color, America saw something. This is not a joke. This is college football. In Oklahoma, the script rhymed. A young state, oil, dust, wind. A flagship university that once looked like an afterthought to East Coast eyes. Under Bud Wilkinson in the 1,950 seconds, Oklahoma did not just win, it dominated. 47 straight victories. A standard of excellence that announced to the college football world, the frontier has arrived. In the 1,970 seconds and 80 seconds, Barry Switzer's Oklahoma teams turned the wishbone into a weapon of humiliation. Defenses designed to handle conventional attacks were shredded by a farm state offense that loaded the field with speed and power. Sooners, another name rooted in rough beginnings. Another former punchline turned into a national brand. Kids in New Jersey, California, and Florida knew Oklahoma football. They could pick out the crimson helmets. They could not name all 8 Ivies. That is not what Cow College meant in 1890, but that is what it came to mean. Across the Deep South, a similar story. Alabama, a poor rural state whose name was more associated with hardship and segregation than prestige. At its flagship university, Bear Bryant built a football identity as hard as his tower and as unmistakable as his hat. Disciplined practices, brutal conditioning, national titles. You did not need to know much about the school to know that when Alabama took the field, football mattered there. Their games became national events. Their colors became national symbols. It was never inevitable that a school in Tuscaloosa would become one of the most recognizable brands in American sports. But in the America that actually existed, from cotton fields to factories to suburbs, it made sense. A public flagship with deep local roots could tap emotions that distant elites no longer reached. Texas A&M and Auburn are textbook Cow College cases. A&M, agricultural and mechanical in its bones. Corps of cadets drilling on campus. Kyle Field rising out of the heart of Texas. Yale practice at midnight. Traditions as thick as dust. Auburn, from Alabama Polytechnic to a full university. A tight-knit town in East Alabama. Orange and blue. Toomer's Corner rolled in toilet paper after big wins. A sense that the entire town was one big, extended campus. These were never meant to be finishing schools. They were built to train farmers, engineers, and soldiers. Yet on autumn Saturdays, their stadiums shook like nothing in New England. Recruits did not see cow colleges. They saw 80,000 people losing their minds for them. They saw a place willing to stake its identity on what happened between those lines. The insult had flipped itself inside out. The schools once belittled were now circled on everyone else's schedule in red ink. Why did these farm schools and state schools win? Start with culture. These were the people's universities. Their alumni bases were broad and deep. Farmers, doctors, pipe fitters, lawyers, teachers, store owners, nurses, veterans. If you lived in one of these states, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Alabama, Texas, Ohio, Florida, Georgia, there was a good chance someone in your family had gone to the big state school, wanted to go, or wore the hat anyway. That meant when the team played, it was not just their team, it was yours. Next, geography and demographics. The richest talent pools in high school football formed in states dominated by big public universities: Texas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Alabama, Oklahoma, the Carolinas. When a blue-chip player looked around, the natural choices were often the big flagship, the land grant, the place his coach trusted, the helmet he'd been seeing on TV every Saturday since he was a kid. The so-called cow colleges did not have to sneak into someone else's neighborhood. They were already in the middle of it. They were the obvious choice. Then, innovation. Without a century of old boy tradition holding them back, many of these programs became laboratories, new formations, speed-based schemes. Strength and conditioning as science instead of hobby, film study, year-round recruiting. They were hungry. If it worked, they adopted it. They did not have to preserve anyone's romantic image of how the game used to be. And finally, television. When TV networks started buying college football rights, they had choices. They could beam out small, quiet stadiums with scattered crowds and polite applause. Or they could show this: a packed bowl of red in a farm state, a deafening night game in the Deep South. A single flagship university turning an entire state into one massive viewing audience. From a production standpoint, the decision was easy. Big public and land-grant schools gave them one dominant brand per state, one set of colors, one fight song, one massive built-in audience. That is gold. So the cameras came. First for a few special games, then for more, then for weekly showcases. As they did, they pulled the center of college football further away from marble gates and toward concrete coliseums in places that used to be punchlines. With cameras came money, bigger contracts, modern facilities, higher coaching salaries, more resources for recruiting, nutrition, training. That money did not go to the Ivy League powers of 1,890. It went to the schools America actually tuned in to watch. The success curve tilted even more. By the time many viewers now in their 60 seconds and 70 seconds were teens, the shift was complete in their living rooms, even if no one wrote the headline. Think back. If you were a kid in the 1,960 seconds, 70 seconds, or 80 seconds, who did you see on those few national broadcasts? Nebraska, Oklahoma, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Texas, Penn State, USC, LSU, Florida State, Miami, Auburn, Notre Dame, and others. The pattern is obvious now. Big publics, land grants, large state flagships. Once mocked outsiders like Notre Dame, New Year's Day turned into a de facto national holiday built around those names: rose, orange, sugar, cotton. Behind almost every helmet was a school that, at some point, someone had called second class, rural, Catholic, public, practical, not real in the old sense. And yet, on those days that the whole country watched, these were the schools that defined college football. The old Eastern elite still had their records and traditions. What they did not have was the attention of the nation. Underneath all of this is a simple class story. Cow College had always meant not like us, not refined, not worthy. But big-time college football has never been a sport that rewards delicacy. It rewards commitment. It rewards bodies in seats. It rewards loudness. It rewards institutions willing to put their whole public identity on the line for 3 hours a week. It rewards the schools that can get 70,000, 80,000, 100,000 people to agree without talking about it, that this matters. Those conditions favored the land grants and flagships. They were already built to represent entire populations. When they tied themselves to football, it clicked. The team became the front porch. For millions of Americans, the only part of a university they ever saw was its football team. And for the last half-century, the teams they have seen most often have not worn the colors of the old aristocracy. They have worn the colors of the farm schools, the engineering schools, the state schools, the cow colleges. Now look at the modern map. When conference commissioners sit down with television networks and talk billions, who anchors the conversation? Not the schools that used to laugh, the schools they laughed at. Big Ten, anchored by Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and other massive publics. SEC, anchored by Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Texas, A&M, Florida. ACC, Big 12, and others leaned on passionate state bases, realignment chases, viewers, eyeballs, statewide loyalty. Brands that make sense in living rooms where people wear the logo to church and the grocery store. Those brands did not come from nowhere. They grew from that land grant promise and those cow college campuses. The ones built with barns and labs. The ones that took kids whose parents had never seen a college. Those are the schools that now command the largest payouts, drive kickoff times, fill primetime slots, get argued about all week on national shows. The sport may twist itself into new shapes, but that fact tells you who won the long game. There is another layer, and it belongs to the people listening who lived it. If you are old enough to remember when almost every game you cared about was on radio, you know this shift not as a chart, but as a ritual. Picture a Saturday in the 1,950 seconds, or 60 seconds. Your father or grandfather comes in from the field, or from the shop, or from a long morning shift. Boots off, chair claimed. Radio or early TV on. Whose voices do you hear? You do not hear a steady diet of Harvard-Yale. You hear a voice raising over static to describe a long run in Lincoln, a goal line stand in Tuscaloosa, a late drive in Norman, a bowl game in Dallas or New Orleans. You hear marching bands that sound like you're part of the country. Those teams became part of your household, in the kitchen, in the truck, in the background while you raked leaves or fixed something in the garage. They were woven into family schedules, weddings planned around big games, chores rushed to finish before kickoff, stories told in terms of seasons. Then television took over. The cameras did not leave those places. They leaned in. They panned across student sections in overalls and boots. They showed small-town mayors, farmers, and doctors, all wearing the same color. They gave the rest of the country a clear look at where the emotional center of the sport now lived. The old elites could claim to have invented the game, but the game belonged to somebody else now. The Ivy League and many private powers made choices. They de-emphasized big-time football. They dropped scholarships. They accepted smaller crowds, smaller stakes, a quieter kind of pride. There is nothing wrong with that, but it left space, and the land grants and state schools filled it. They poured in concrete, bleachers, lights, practice fields, weight rooms, coaching staffs. They recruited kids from farms, cities, suburbs, anywhere their flag flew. They gave those kids a stage that felt like the center of the universe on fall Saturdays. By the time the Bowl Coalition, the BCS, and later the playoff era arrived, the basic assumption was flipped from 100 years earlier. If you are deciding a national champion, you are going through the big publics. Of course, the contenders are Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Oklahoma, LSU, Texas, Florida State, Clemson, and similar names. No one is surprised, because for decades, those are the schools that have been living in your living room. There is also the question of who wore the jerseys. Again and again, rosters at these schools drew heavily from working and middle-class backgrounds, local kids, rural kids, first-generation college students, players whose parents listened on radio from fields, factory floors, and front porches. When they took the field for State U, they were not simply representing an institution. They were representing the idea that those institutions made possible, that this level of opportunity and attention was not just for the sons of privilege. For many fans, watching those players wear the name of their state or their agricultural college on their chest had a different charge than watching a legacy kid follow a family script. It felt like them. That connection is not a marketing slogan. It is baked into what those colleges were created to do. That is why, even as the sport grows more commercial, that old emotional bond still holds in so many places. Ask an older fan in Lincoln or Norman, Baton Rouge or Columbus, College Station or Tuscaloosa, what their program means to them. You will not get a speech about content or brand alignment. You will get stories. Cold metal bleachers, long car rides, saving for tickets, listening with a father who is gone now, teaching grandchildren the fight song. Only certain kinds of schools could ever weave themselves that deeply into that many lives. The cow colleges, the farm schools, the public flagships, the schools built for everybody. Today, you hear new complaints. Money rules. Kickoff times move. Conferences chase new markets. The old geography bends. Some of those complaints are justified. But beneath all of that movement, the core fact that transformed college football from an Eastern parlor sport into a national ritual is still there. This sport draws its strength from the places where ordinary people see themselves, from the industrial Midwest, from the Southern Pines, from the Texas Plains, from the wheat, the corn, the oil fields, the mill towns, the towns with one high school and one college team that matters. Those places were once mocked as unsophisticated. Now they are the columns holding up Saturdays. You cannot tell the true history of college football without telling the story of land-grant charters and state flags, of agriculture labs and engineering halls, of campuses once written off as cow colleges. You cannot explain why 100,000 people will drive across a state just to sit together and watch young men in their school's colors without talking about who those schools were built to serve. When you do tell that story honestly, the old insult at the beginning does not survive. It turns around. It becomes the punchline, and it does not land on the farm schools. It lands on the ones who thought their laughter would echo forever. So if you're listening to this as someone in that older generation, someone who remembers fiddling with the antenna, someone who remembers when the game of the week was a big event, someone who recalls when bowl games felt like rare treasure, think about which logos filled your screen. Think about whose fight songs you can still hum. Think about the voices you still hear calling a long run for a team in scarlet, or crimson, or burnt orange, or purple and gold, from a campus surrounded by fields and trees, not skyscrapers. Chances are, your Saturdays were ruled not by the old aristocrats of higher education, but by their country cousins, by the universities that took the cow college label and built on top of it concrete, steel, bands, rituals, legends. They mocked the farm schools. Then, those schools filled the stands. They filled the TV slots. They filled the recruiting rankings. They filled the sports memory. And now, when a new season begins, and networks circle their calendars, and fans plan their falls, the cameras go back to the same places. Norman, Lincoln, Tuscaloosa, College Station, Athens, Ann Arbor, Columbus, Baton Rouge, Clemson, dozens like them. Every time they do, there's an unspoken caption along the bottom of the screen. These are the schools that rule college football Saturdays. The schools they once called cow colleges. The schools that won. In the stories to come, you can zoom in. You can walk the sideline with one program at a time. Nebraska, from muddy fields to sellout streaks and national titles. Oklahoma, from frontier desperation to 47 straight wins. Alabama, from regional outsider to a symbol of relentless excellence. Texas A&M, Auburn, Florida State, Penn State, Clemson, and more. Each riding the same currents, each story different, each story rooted in the same foundation. That what began as an insult collided with the real America. A country where the biggest stages eventually go to the institutions that open their doors the widest, sit closest to the people, and are willing to stake their pride on 11 players at a time. When those institutions line up on a Saturday with their name on the jersey, they are not just playing a game. They are carrying a flag for millions who will never sit in their classrooms, but still call them our school. That is why this belongs in education, not just sports. Because underneath scores and standings, it is about what kind of colleges America chose to put at the center of its attention and what that says about who we think we are. So picture it one last time. A campus once dismissed as a cow college. A town ringed with fields. A stadium rising up from that soil, packed to the rim. A band playing. A team in colors no one used to respect. And hundreds of miles away, in a city that once believed it owned this sport, a television tuned not to its own local darlings, but to that farm school's game. The smirk is gone. The verdict is different. On this day, on this broadcast, on this continent, they are all watching the farm school. They mocked the farm schools. Then they ruled college football Saturdays.